Hello, in this video we're going to be looking at how to define specific input parameters. So starting where we left off on the previous video, we are right now on the scenario section, and if we move our mouse all the way to the upper right corner, we can click into the input catalog. Once clicking in the input catalog, we will find a listing of all of the parameters that are being used for a specific model that we're working on. So now let's start looking at some of the components that we have available on the screen. The main component here would be a table, and here we have the label of the parameter, which category it forms the part of, description. We have the upper bound and lower bound of the values that this parameter can take, and we also have the base units that are being used for this specific model. Now if we go up to the top where it says input categories, here we can filter out the table depending on the categories of the parameter. So for example, if I just want to look at parameters that have to do with climate, we click on that, and here we see parameters that are derived from the climate category, which is, for example, the pan evaporation, the influence that we have at the San Marcial gauges, precipitation, watershed input at Caballo, and some other observed data that we can use here as a benchmark. Now, another way to filter out parameters would be to do a direct search. So if I were to put here something about agriculture, it would just give us parameters that have agri either on the label or on the description of the parameter. And finally, we have these other filters here where we have different kind of categories. So we can look at parameters that are editable. So this means that the values from each of these parameters can be user changeable. We also have non-editable parameters. So normally these parameters depend on a specific predefined scenario, and we have access to look at the information but not to actually change the granular values of the parameters. And finally, we have coded or observed parameters. These ones don't specifically affect the outcome of the model. This is mainly observed data that is used for reference, and when we go to look at the output catalog, we can see how we can use some of this information into our graphs. So we'll get to that later on. Okay, so now let's go to actually change some values of parameters. To do that, I'm going to go into the editable filter, and I'm going to look at the minimum storage value at Elephant Butte Reservoir. So if I click on that row, the next screen will show me a detailed view about that specific parameter. In this case, we have the label here at the top, EV minimum storage, which is actually, according to the description, is the Elephant Butte Reservoir minimum storage volume throughout the whole simulation. We also have some additional metadata like the parameter name used in the model, the units that we're currently looking at, and finally we also have the data visualization, and this can change depending on the type of parameter that we're looking at. In this case, we just have a single value parameter. We can see that the current value here is 17,300. But if we take this dial and move it around, we can change the value of that specific parameter. And if I go down a little bit into the data tools option, here we have a box that it lets me change between different units of measure. So for example, right now I'm looking at acre feet, but I can change to thousands of acre feet or millions of cubic meters. So if I click on thousands of acre feet, here's the updated value, updated units here, and I can also look at it on millions of cubic meters, and it doesn't matter on what units you have it. You can dynamically changes the value for that specific parameter in any unit. And in case that you want to reset to the default value, if we go all the way to the right corner, we have a reset button. So if we click on this, this would bring back the parameter to the default value that it had at the beginning. Okay, so now let's look at another example with a more complex parameter. And in this case, we're going to be looking at the inflows at the San Marcial gauges. So just to put this into context, if we go back to the climate scenarios, we have that the parameter here that we're affecting, if we click on learn more, is going to be the inflows at San Marcial. So let's say that we have different values that we want to try for the inflows at San Marcial, and we don't specifically want to use a predefined scenario. So in that case, we can go in and actually change each of these data points manually. So let's close this down. Let's go back to the input catalog. And then I'm going to look for those inflows at San Marcial gauges. I click on it here. And here we have the detailed information about that specific parameter. So if we go to the data visualization section, we actually have more options available. Since this is a time series, we can see this as a table, we can look at it as a line plot, or we can look at it as a bar plot. And alongside with the data, we have also that context data that we were looking at, for example, in the line plot. We can see some mean flow values between different ranges of years. So one of the things that we can do directly here is that, let's say that we're going to change some of these actual values. But we're going to do it on a different units, just to give an example. So let's say we go to millions of cubic meters. So now we have millions of cubic meters here. And for the first year, instead of having 316 millions of cubic meters, let's say we change it to 500, right? So once we change this value, if we look at it on the line plot, we see that it directly updated that point of information. And by this point, the information would be ready to be used for this specific scenario. So it won't be erased. It's already saved at this point. We also have some additional data tools. Since we have a time series, apart from changing units, we can also add simple moving averages, just to give us a better perspective on the trend. So here we would select a specific data set. So I want to apply a moving average over the San Marcial inflows, and then I can select how many consecutive points I wanted to start the average with. So let's say I want to start with a 5-year average, and here it is. So this would be the new trend that we have here, and this is just an extra tool that we have available for this with this sort of visualization. In a similar way that we can reset back to the initial values on the minimum storage, we can also do that for the time series. So if we were to go back here and change a bunch of numbers, let's put 500 and some of the values here. We look at the line plot and the row set. And so if I click on the reset button, which is here on the right section of the graph, click reset, and this will bring back the values to its original initial form. And if we go to the table value, we can see how they're now nicely reset. Now another way to play with this information is that we can click on the export data, and what this will do is that here you will receive the whole time series, and you can save it to an Excel file and play with the information yourself. So I'm going to cancel here, and I'm going to go back, and this is pretty much the overview of our input catalog. And on the next video, we will look at how to actually execute a water balance scenario.